You ever sit across from someone holding a glass of vintage champagne, listening to them casually explain why you're not worth the dirt on their imported Italian shoes, all while knowing your father owns the literal ocean they sail their yachts on? That was my Tuesday. For 2 years, I swallowed the insults, the sneers, and the gold digger accusations from my billionaire in-laws, desperate to live a normal life. Then they crossed the line, and I made one phone call to my father. For as long as I could remember, my identity had been a gilded cage. I was born Beatrice Victoria Hamilton, but to the world, or at least the world that cared about European aristocracy and sovereign wealth, I was Her Royal Highness, Princess Beatrice of the Sovereign Principality of Aldovia. My family's lineage traced back centuries, our wealth built on shipping empires, real estate across 5 continents, and an unbroken bloodline. But titles are heavy, and wealth of that magnitude attracts nothing but sycophants, opportunists, and yes-men. I wanted out. Not forever, but just long enough to know what it felt like to be a person, rather than a geopolitical asset. Under the guise of pursuing a master's degree in art history, I moved to Boston. I dropped my title, rented a modest but safe apartment in Beacon Hill, and adopted a delightfully boring backstory. I was just B.A., a freelance archivist whose parents worked in logistics back in Europe. I bought my clothes off the rack, learned how to use public transit, and reveled in the glorious, intoxicating feeling of being completely unexceptional. Then I met William Prescott. We literally collided in the rare book section of the Boston Public Library. I dropped my notes. He helped me pick them up. He was charming, with tousled blonde hair and a smile that seemed entirely genuine. He asked me out for coffee, and I, starved for normal human connection, said yes. I didn't know until our 3rd date that William was the heir to Prescott Industries, a massive American conglomerate specializing in commercial real estate and luxury hotels. The Prescotts were old money. Newport, Rhode Island, Mayflower descendant old money. They were the kind of wealthy that demanded everyone else in the room shrink so they could take up more space. Will, however, seemed different. He was apologetic about his family's wealth. He told me he wanted to forge his own path, independent of his father's overbearing legacy. I fell in love with his supposed rebellion. I saw a kindred spirit, someone who, like me, felt suffocated by the expectations of their bloodline. For the first year, our relationship was a private sanctuary. We spent weekends exploring New England, eating cheap takeout on his apartment floor, and dreaming about a quiet future. I never told him about my royal status. Every time I thought about confessing, a nagging fear held me back. What if he looks at me differently? What if he stops seeing B and only sees the princess? I justified the lie by telling myself I'd tell him when we were ready to get married. The illusion shattered the day Will took me to Newport to meet his family. The Prescott estate, a sprawling limestone mansion on Ocean Drive, was designed to intimidate. Wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. Will squeezed my hand as we pulled up in his Range Rover, whispering, "Don't let my mother get to you. She's particular." Eleanor Prescott was a terrifyingly elegant woman. She wore Chanel like it was armor and possessed a smile that never quite reached her icy blue eyes. From the moment I stepped into her cavernous marble foyer, I was an intruder. "So, Beatrice?" Eleanor purred over a dinner of seared scallops and tense silence. "William tells us your family is in logistics. How quaint. Do they drive the trucks, or do they just load them?" Will's younger sister, Chloe, snickered into her wine glass. I kept my voice perfectly level. "My father oversees shipping routes, Mrs. Prescott, mostly in the Mediterranean and the North Sea." It wasn't a lie. My father commanded one of the largest merchant and royal naval fleets in the world. "I see," Eleanor said, her tone dripping with condescension. "And you're an archivist. I suppose staring at dusty old papers is a lovely little hobby until you find someone to support you." I looked at Will, waiting for him to defend me. He just gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile and focused very hard on cutting his scallops. A tiny fracture appeared in my perception of him that night. He wasn't a rebel standing up to his family. He was a hostage suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Before we left, Eleanor pulled me aside in the drawing room. "Let us not mince words, Beatrice. William is meant for a certain caliber of woman, someone with pedigree, someone who understands the complexities of our world. You are a lovely girl, I'm sure, but you are out of your depth. Do not think for a second I don't know what you're really after." I looked back at her, resisting the urge to laugh. I was wearing a plastic watch, but the necklace hidden under my collar was an heirloom sapphire that cost more than her entire summer estate. "I assure you, Mrs. Prescott," I said softly, "I don't want a dime of your family's money." She scoffed. "They all say that, dear. Just know this. I will protect my son from gold diggers. You will not win." Despite his mother's blatant hostility, Will proposed 6 months later. We were walking along the Charles River at sunset when he dropped to one knee and pulled out a stunning 3-carat Tiffany diamond. "Bea, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said, his eyes shining. "Marry me. Let's build a life together." My heart soared, but dread pooled in my stomach. I said yes, but I knew the clock had run out. I had to tell him the truth. That night, sitting in my apartment, I poured us both a glass of wine and took a deep breath. "Will, there's something I need to tell you. Something major about my family." He laughed, kissing my forehead. "Unless your dad is an international spy or you're secretly a mafia princess, I don't care, Bea. I love you for you. My family might be obsessed with status, but I'm not." His words, meant to comfort me, only cemented my fear. If I told him now, I would prove his mother right. I was a liar. Worse, what if the massive disparity in our true social standing broke his pride? I made a cowardly choice. I decided to wait until the wedding planning was finalized. Once we were completely insulated in our own love, I would reveal everything. It was the worst mistake of my life. The engagement announcement was treated by the Prescott family not as a celebration, but as a declaration of war. Eleanor immediately took control of the wedding. She insisted on a lavish ceremony in Newport with 500 guests, senators, CEOs, and old money aristocrats. When I timidly suggested a smaller, more intimate gathering, Eleanor laughed in my face. "This isn't a backyard barbecue, Beatrice. This is a Prescott wedding. It is a corporate and social event. You just need to show up and try not to look entirely out of place." The psychological warfare escalated. Eleanor hired a private investigator to dig into my background. They found nothing, of course. My royal security detail, operating out of Europe, had scrubbed my B identity so thoroughly that I appeared to be a perfectly boring middle-class citizen with no debt and no criminal record. Ironically, this lack of history made Eleanor even more suspicious. She was convinced I was a seasoned grifter operating under a false identity. Chloe, Will's sister, made it her mission to humiliate me socially. During a dress shopping appointment at the Oscar de la Renta boutique in New York, Chloe accidentally invited Will's ex-girlfriend, Caroline Astor Hayes. Caroline was exactly what Eleanor wanted, a tall, blonde socialite whose family name was practically printed on American currency. While I was pinned into a silk gown by the tailor, Caroline sat on the velvet sofa, sipping champagne and reminiscing with Chloe about vacations in Saint Barthélemy. "It's just such a shame William is settling," Caroline sighed loudly enough for me to hear. "I mean, it's sweet that he's doing the whole charity case thing, but how will she ever host a gala? She doesn't know anyone." "I know," Chloe replied. "Mother's devastated. She practically had to buy Beatrice an entirely new wardrobe just so she wouldn't embarrass us at the country club." I stepped out of the dressing room, the heavy silk dragging on the floor. I looked Chloe dead in the eye. "Actually, Chloe, I buy my own clothes, and I don't need a country club membership to know how to hold a conversation. Excuse me." I walked back into the dressing room, stripped off the dress, and left the boutique. When I told Will about it later that evening, furious and shaking, he offered his usual pathetic defense. "Bea, you know how Chloe is. She's just fiercely loyal to the family, and Caroline is an old friend. You just need to let these things roll off your back. If you fight them, You're just giving my mother ammunition." "I'm not giving her ammunition, Will. I'm expecting my fiancé to stand up for me," I shouted. He pulled me into a hug, but his arms felt heavy, restrictive. "I do stand up for you, but we have to play the game, just until the wedding is over. Once we're married, we'll move back to Boston, and we'll rarely have to see them. Just hold on a little longer." I clung to that promise. I believed that Will was simply caught in the crossfire of his toxic family. I didn't realize until much later that Will wasn't caught in the crossfire. He was holding one of the guns. 1 month before the wedding, I was summoned to the Prescott Industries headquarters in downtown Boston. Will told me it was just a formality, a standard meeting with the family lawyers to finalize some paperwork. When I walked into the sleek mahogany-paneled boardroom, I found Will, Eleanor, Richard Prescott, and a team of 3 terrifyingly stoic corporate attorneys waiting for me. "Sit down, Beatrice," Richard commanded, speaking to me for perhaps the 3rd time in 2 years. An attorney slid a thick binder across the table. "This is the prenuptial agreement," Eleanor said smoothly. "Given the vast disparity in assets between you and William, it is entirely non-negotiable." I opened the binder. It was draconian. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, I would receive absolutely nothing. No spousal support, no property, not even the engagement ring. It included a cheating clause that penalized me but completely ignored Will. It even had a lifestyle clause dictating that I had to maintain a certain weight and could not publicly embarrass the Prescott family. I looked at Will. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. "Will, you agree with this?" "It's standard, B," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's just to protect the company. It doesn't mean anything about us." Eleanor leaned forward, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "If you truly love my son, Beatrice, and not his trust fund, you will sign it without hesitation. Unless, of course, your intentions were financial all along." She thought she had me trapped. She thought I would cry, argue, or storm out, proving myself to be the greedy opportunist she always claimed I was. Instead, I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. I reached into my purse, pulled out a pen, and flipped to the signature page. I didn't even bother reading the rest of the clauses. I signed my fake commoner name with a flourish and slid the binder back across the table. "There," I said, smiling brightly. "Now you never have to worry about me taking a single cent of your money." The room fell dead silent. Eleanor looked at the signature, then up at me, utterly bewildered. It was the first time I had ever seen her look unsure. Will let out a massive sigh of relief, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, but internally I was already pulling away. I should have ended it there. I should have walked out of that boardroom and never looked back. But stubbornness is a royal trait, and I refused to let Eleanor win by running away. I was going to marry Will, and I was going to prove them all wrong. Fast forward to the rehearsal dinner, the night before the wedding. It was held in a massive glass tent on the lawn of the Prescott estate, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Hundreds of candles flickered in crystal candelabras. A string quartet played softly in the background. It was a picture-perfect evening, completely ruined by the people hosting it. I was seated at the head table next to Will, forcing myself to smile as guest after guest approached to offer their congratulations. The veiled insults were relentless. "You must feel like Cinderella," one aunt chirped. "It's so wonderful how William is elevating you," a family friend whispered loudly. Then came the toasts. Will's best man gave a standard, slightly drunken speech. Chloe gave a thinly veiled monologue about how much she would miss having Will all to herself. Finally, Eleanor stood up, tapping a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The tent quieted down. Eleanor looked immaculate in a navy silk gown, the matriarch holding court. "Family, friends," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "We are gathered here to celebrate the union of my son William and his bride Beatrice." She paused just long enough for the word bride to sound like an insult. When William first brought Beatrice home, we were, admittedly, surprised. In our world, we are raised with certain expectations. We build legacies. We preserve history. Beatrice comes from a very different world, a simpler world. She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. Will squeezed my thigh under the table. Don't react, his squeeze said. Just take it. It is a testament to William's generous heart that he looked past pedigree, past status, and past financial limitations, Eleanor continued. Some might call it a charitable endeavor. Some might say he is rescuing her from a life of mediocrity. But I say, it is a brave risk, because one never truly knows the intentions of an outsider, do they? We can only hope that Beatrice understands the immense gift she is being given tomorrow, and that she remembers her place within this family. She raised her glass. To William, our golden boy, whose heart is perhaps a little too big for his own good. A smattering of polite, uncomfortable applause rippled through the tent. My ears were ringing, my vision tunneled. I turned to Will, waiting for him to stand up, waiting for him to take the microphone, to tell his mother she had crossed a line, to defend the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 12 hours. Will picked up his champagne flute, smiled at his mother, and took a sip. In that single devastating second, the illusion of William Prescott shattered completely. He wasn't trapped by his family. He agreed with them. He liked playing the role of my savior. He liked that I was beneath him because it made him feel powerful. The anger that had been simmering inside me for 2 years didn't boil over. It froze solid. I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up. The tent grew quiet again as all eyes turned to me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked directly at Eleanor, then down at Will. You're absolutely right, Eleanor, I said, my voice carrying clearly without a microphone. One never truly knows the intentions of an outsider. And William, you don't have to worry about rescuing me anymore. I reached for my left hand, pulled off the 3-carat Tiffany ring, and dropped it into Will's half-empty champagne glass. It sank to the bottom with a quiet clink. "Bea, what are you doing?" Will hissed, his face flushing red. "I'm leaving, Will, and I'm not coming back." I turned and walked out of the tent. I heard Eleanor scoff loudly behind me. "Let her go, William. She's throwing a tantrum because she finally realized she's outclassed." I walked across the manicured lawn, my heels sinking slightly into the grass. The cool ocean breeze hit my face. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. I had a special encrypted application installed on it, one I hadn't opened in 2 years. I pressed the single button on the screen. It rang exactly once before a gruff voice answered, "Your Highness, are you secure?" "I'm perfectly safe, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady. "But I am done hiding. I'm currently in Newport, Rhode Island, the Prescott estate. I want to leave." "Understood, ma'am. Shall I send a car?" I looked back at the glowing tent, hearing the faint sound of laughter. They thought they had broken a peasant. They thought they had chased off a gold digger. "No, Marcus," I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. "A car's too quiet. Where is my father's Atlantic fleet currently positioned?" "The Royal Sovereign and its escort vessels are conducting exercises off the coast of Maine, Your Highness. We are approximately 2 hours out by sea, 40 minutes by air." "Bring them," I commanded. "Bring the royal yacht. Bring the escorts. And Marcus?" "Yes, Your Highness?" "Make sure they use the floodlights. I want these people to see exactly who they just insulted." Sitting on the damp stone of the seawall, I waited. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out before me, an endless expanse of pitch black, mirroring the sudden emptiness in my chest. Behind me, the muffled sounds of the rehearsal dinner continued. The string quartet had resumed playing, attempting to paper over the awkwardness of my departure. 10 minutes passed before I heard the crunch of dress shoes on the gravel path. "Bea, this is ridiculous," William's voice snapped, laced with irritation rather than concern. He marched down the sloping lawn, adjusting his silk tie. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? My mother was making a speech. You completely humiliated me in front of the board of directors and half of Newport society." I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for the first sign of my family's arrival. I humiliated you, Will? That's an interesting perspective. He sighed, the heavy, exaggerated sigh of a parent dealing with a petulant toddler. He stepped up to the seawall, standing a few feet away. Look, I get it. The prenup was harsh, and my mother's toast was a little pointed, but you have to understand where she's coming from. We have a legacy to protect. You storming out like a child just proves her point that you don't know how to handle the pressure of this lifestyle. This lifestyle, I repeated softly, finally turning to look at him. In the moonlight, the golden boy looked remarkably small. You think I'm intimidated by your lifestyle, Will? You think a country club membership and a leased summer house in Rhode Island are the pinnacle of human achievement? His face flushed with anger. Don't pretend you aren't walking away from the best thing that ever happened to you. Where are you going to go, B? Back to your cramped apartment? Back to organizing files for minimum wage while your dad tracks shipping containers? You're making a massive mistake. I agree, I said, stepping off the seawall. I made a massive mistake 2 years ago when I picked up my dropped notes in the library and thought you were a decent man. Before Will could formulate a response, the wind changed. It started as a low, rhythmic thumping, a vibration that I felt in the soles of my shoes before I actually heard it. The water in the bay began to ripple erratically. Will frowned, looking up at the night sky. The thumping grew louder, escalating into a deafening, mechanical roar. What the hell is that? Will yelled over the noise, taking a step back. From the north, 2 massive military-grade Sikorsky helicopters materialized out of the darkness. They were entirely matte black, save for the gold crest of the Aldovian royal family emblazoned on their sides. They swept low over the Prescott estate, their downdraft whipping the manicured lawn into a frenzy and violently rattling the glass panes of the rehearsal dinner tent. Guests began pouring out of the tent, holding onto their expensive updos and shielding their eyes. Eleanor Prescott stumbled out in her navy silk gown, screeching something incoherent at the sky. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered in a defensive perimeter over the water, their powerful searchlights sweeping the estate. Then, the ocean itself seemed to wake up. A deep, bone-rattling blast from a ship's horn echoed across the bay. From the heavy fog bank offshore, a vessel emerged. But it wasn't just a vessel. It was the Sovereign Dawn, my father's personal 500-foot superyacht, a floating palace of steel and glass that dwarfed the local Newport megayachts like a shark swimming among goldfish. And she didn't come alone. Flanking the massive yacht were 2 naval escort frigates, their gray hulls slicing through the water, armed and imposing. The fleet slowed to a halt just outside the cove. Suddenly, a dozen blindingly bright floodlights flicked on from the decks, pinning the Prescott estate in stark, inescapable daylight. The sheer wattage illuminated the entire lawn, the glass tent, and the terrified, gaping faces of the 500 elite guests. B, what is happening? Is this a military drill? Will shouted, grabbing my arm. I calmly reached down, peeled his fingers off my wrist, and smoothed my dress. No, William, it's my ride. A sleek, black tender boat detached from the Sovereign Dawn and tore across the water toward the estate's private dock, its twin engines roaring. As it bumped against the wooden pylons, 6 heavily armed men in immaculate, dark tactical suits stepped off. They didn't look like private security. They moved with the lethal, synchronized precision of a sovereign nation's elite royal guard. At the helm was Commander Hayes, my father's head of security. He stepped onto the dock, his silver hair catching the floodlights, his posture rigid. He ignored Will completely and marched straight up the lawn toward me. When he was 3 paces away, the imposing commander stopped, clicked his heels together, and bowed deeply. Your Royal Highness? Hayes's voice boomed over the fading roar of the helicopter engines, carrying easily to the terrified crowd of wedding guests gathered near the tent. The fleet is at your disposal. His Majesty sends his regards and awaits your return. Will's jaw practically unhinged. He looked from Hayes to the heavily armed guards securing the perimeter of his family's dock, to the massive naval frigates offshore, and finally to me. Royal Highness? Will choked out, his voice cracking. B, what is he talking about? Who are these people? I smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into his world. I expanded to fill my own. Allow me to formally reintroduce myself, William, I said, my voice projecting with the practiced cadence of someone raised to address parliaments. I am Her Royal Highness, Princess Beatrice Victoria Hamilton, daughter of King Arthur Hamilton, sovereign ruler of Aldovia. The silence that fell over the lawn was absolute, broken only by the lapping of the waves and the low hum of the naval destroyers. Eleanor Prescott, having pushed her way through the crowd of stunned guests, arrived just in time to hear my title. The glass of champagne she had been clutching slipped from her fingers, shattering against a stone paver. Aldovia, Eleanor whispered, her face draining of color. Her icy, untouchable demeanor collapsed in an instant. She looked like a woman who had just realized she'd been actively poking a sleeping tiger with a very short stick. Yes, Eleanor. Aldovia, I replied, turning my gaze to her. The quaint little country where my father works in logistics. Specifically, the logistics of controlling a sovereign wealth fund worth roughly $300 billion, and a merchant fleet that dominates global shipping lanes. Richard Prescott, Will's father, pushed past his wife. As the CEO of Prescott Industries, Richard was a man ruled by ledgers, contracts, and geopolitical leverage. I watched the terrifying realization wash over him as his brain connected the dots. Hamilton, Richard breathed, taking a cautious step forward. The Hamilton Group. Your family holds the primary veto power in the European Commercial Zoning Commission. Very good, Richard, I said, nodding approvingly. We do. Fact, Prescott Industries had spent the last 5 years pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into a massive luxury commercial expansion across the Mediterranean coast, a project that required final zoning approval from a European Commission heavily influenced and quietly funded by the Aldovian crown. My father's logistics company held the key to the Prescott's entire financial future. Be please, Will stammered, stepping toward me with his hands raised in a placating gesture. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, sickening panic. I didn't know? Why didn't you tell me? If you had just told me who you were. If I had told you who I was, Will, what would have changed? I interrupted, my tone freezing him in his tracks. Would your mother have suddenly found me acceptable? Yes, because I would have been a prize to show off at the country club, a title to slap onto your family's new money. But you wouldn't have loved me any more than you did today. You loved the idea of saving me. You loved having someone you could look down on. That's not true, Will pleaded, tears actually welling in his eyes. He looked over at his mother, who was frantically pulling at her pearl necklace, unable to speak. B, I love you. We can fix this. The wedding is tomorrow. We can start over. There is no starting over, I said, stepping closer to him, lowering my voice so only he and his parents could hear. You handed me a prenuptial agreement designed to leave me destitute, out of a paranoid fear that I wanted a piece of your pathetic little real estate empire. My engagement ring, which your mother so loudly proclaimed I was lucky to wear, cost less than the security system on my father's yacht. I turned to Eleanor, who was physically trembling. The woman who had sneered at my off-the-rack dresses, who had hired investigators to dig up dirt on my family, was now staring at me with pure, unadulterated terror. You wanted pedigree, Eleanor, I said, my voice echoing across the lawn. You wanted someone who understood the complexities of your world, but you severely overestimated your place in it. You are a big fish in a remarkably shallow, uninteresting pond, and you are entirely out of your depth. Your Highness, Richard interjected, his voice shaking. He actually bowed his head slightly. It was nauseating to watch the immediate, spineless pivot. Please, my wife's behavior was inexcusable. But Prescott Industries, our family, we meant no disrespect to the crown. The Mediterranean project is dead. I stated plainly. Richard gasped as if I had physically struck him. I spoke with my father this afternoon, I continued calmly. The Aldovian Commission will be denying the zoning permits for Prescott Industries. Additionally, Hamilton Shipping will no longer be transporting your commercial materials across the Atlantic. You can find another logistics company to load your trucks. Will dropped to his knees. It wasn't a romantic gesture. His legs simply gave out. Chloe, who had spent the last 2 years treating me like a servant, was sobbing quietly into the shoulder of Carolyn Astor Hayes, who looked equally horrified. "B, you can't do this," Will begged from the grass, reaching for the hem of my dress. Commander Hayes stepped forward instantly, his hand dropping to the hilt of his sidearm. "Do not touch Her Royal Highness." Will recoiled, pulling his hands back to his chest. "I didn't do this, Will." "You did," I said, looking down at him one last time. "You showed me exactly who you are and exactly how you value the people you claim to love. I'm just returning the favor." I turned my back on the Prescott family. Commander Hayes and his guards formed a tight, protective diamond around me as we walked down the dock toward the waiting tenderboat. The silence of the 500 wedding guests was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stood under the blinding glare of the naval floodlights, watching the charity case walk away with an armada. As I stepped onto the boat, Hayes offered his hand. I took it, stepping onto the polished teak deck. "Take us home, Commander," I said. The engines roared to life. As the boat pulled away from the dock, accelerating toward the illuminated sanctuary of the Sovereign Dawn, I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the ruins of the Prescott estate to know that their gilded empire was already crumbling. I finally felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my false identity lift from my shoulders. The sea air filled my lungs, sharp and cold, tasting fiercely of freedom. Stepping onto the Sovereign Dawn was like crossing a threshold between two entirely different dimensions. The air on the teak deck smelled of expensive sea salt and polished brass. Commander Hayes escorted me into the main salon, a sprawling, glass-enclosed sanctuary adorned with custom Loro Piana upholstery, Lalique crystal fixtures, and a staggering collection of original post-impressionist art that made my former Boston apartment look like a cardboard box. Waiting for me, seated in a velvet armchair with a snifter of Louis XIII cognac in hand, was my father. King Arthur Hamilton was a man who commanded gravity itself. He didn't just walk into rooms, he occupied them entirely. Even in a casual cashmere sweater and bespoke Italian slacks, he radiated the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who could crash a small nation's economy before his morning espresso. He stood up as I entered, setting his glass on the marble side table. His sharp, calculating eyes softened the moment they landed on me. "Beatrice," he said, opening his arms. I ran to him, burying my face in his shoulder. The adrenaline that had kept me standing on that sea wall finally evaporated, leaving me shaking. My father held me tightly, smoothing my hair just as he had when I was a little girl with scraped knees, though this time the scrape was much deeper. "You're safe now, my darling," he murmured, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. "It is over." "I was so stupid, Papa," I whispered against his sweater. I wanted to believe he was different. I wanted it so badly. He pulled back, holding my shoulders, and looked me squarely in the eye. "You were optimistic, Beatrice. That is a virtue, not a flaw. The flaw lies entirely with the small-minded fools who fail to recognize the value of the woman standing in front of them. And I assure you they are about to learn a very painful lesson in valuation." My father wasn't speaking in metaphors. By the time I woke up the next morning in my stateroom, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets with a view of the sun rising over the Atlantic, the dismantling of Prescott Industries had already begun. I walked into the yacht's dining room to find my father and his two chief financial advisors huddled around a mahogany table, a live Bloomberg terminal glowing brightly on a rolling monitor. "Ah, good morning, Beatrice," my father said, sipping a black espresso. "Come look at this. It's quite the masterpiece." I approached the screen. The financial ticker for Prescott Industries, PRSC, was a jagged, plummeting red line. By 9:30 a.m., when the New York Stock Exchange opened, the institutional investors had already caught wind of the Mediterranean project's collapse, one of the advisors explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Word leaked through the European Commercial Zoning Commission that the permits were universally denied. Furthermore, Hamilton Shipping officially terminated all freight contracts with Prescott subsidiaries at 8 a.m. I stared at the numbers. They had lost 14% of their market cap in 45 minutes. "It gets better," my father noted, a predatory smile playing on his lips. Without the Mediterranean expansion to leverage, their debt-to-equity ratio is highly exposed. Rumor has it that Brookfield Asset Management is already circling, looking to hostilely acquire their prime commercial properties in Manhattan and Chicago for pennies on the dollar. I felt a brief fleeting pang of guilt, a remnant of the Bay who used to share cheap takeout with Will. But then I remembered Eleanor's sneering face, the humiliating prenuptial agreement, and Will dropping my ring into his champagne glass like it was a piece of trash. The guilt vanished, replaced by a cold satisfaction. My phone, which had been buzzing incessantly since I turned it back on, illuminated with another incoming call. It was William. He had left 27 voicemails in the last 12 hours. I sat down at the table, poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and finally hit play on the most recent one. "B, please, I know you're angry, but you have to stop this. My father's having a panic attack. The board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. We're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. You proved your point. You're royalty, you're powerful, I get it. Just please, call off the commission. Call off your dad. We can sit down and talk about this like adults." I deleted the voicemail halfway through. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a tantrum. He thought I was just throwing a royal fit to punish him. He didn't understand that to my family, this wasn't revenge. It was a simple business adjustment. You do not partner with liabilities, and the Prescotts had proven themselves to be morally and financially bankrupt. Desperation is a fascinating catalyst. It makes smart people do foolish things, and it makes arrogant people do catastrophic things. 3 weeks after the Newport incident, as the tabloids were calling it, I was back in Europe. I had resumed my royal duties, splitting my time between our estates in Aldovia and London. I had traded my off-the-rack cardigans for Alexander McQueen and Cartier, stepping effortlessly back into the armor of my birthright. The Prescotts, meanwhile, were drowning. Prescott Industries was hemorrhaging cash, and Richard Prescott was on the verge of being ousted by his own board of directors. But instead of quietly accepting their defeat and restructuring what was left of their pride, Eleanor and William decided to go on the offensive. If they couldn't save their money, they were going to try and save their social standing by destroying my reputation. It started with a highly publicized, exclusive interview on a major morning network. I was in my private study in London, reviewing charity proposals, when Commander Hayes walked in and silently turned on the flat-screen television on the wall. There was Will, sitting on a plush couch opposite a sympathetic daytime host. He looked appropriately devastated, hair slightly disheveled, wearing a somber navy suit. "She lied to me for 2 years," Will said, looking directly into the camera with watery puppy dog eyes. "I fell in love with a normal, everyday girl. I brought her into my home, my family welcomed her with open arms, and she deceived us all. She hid her wealth, her title, her entire identity. And when my family simply asked for a standard prenuptial agreement to protect our employees and our legacy, she snapped." The host leaned forward, looking appalled. "So Princess Beatrice essentially masqueraded as a commoner to test you, and when she didn't like the results, she used her royal influence to destroy your family's business?" "Exactly," Will nodded solemnly. "It's a terrifying abuse of power. We are hard-working Americans, and she used her foreign sovereign wealth to maliciously attack our company just because her feelings were hurt. It's cruel. It's unhinged." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a brilliant PR spin. They were trying to paint themselves as the scrappy, innocent American business owners, being bullied by a tyrannical, deceitful European aristocrat. "Shall I have the legal team draft a cease and desist, Your Highness?" Hayes asked, his face a mask of restrained fury. "Or perhaps a defamation suit? We have the resources to bury them in litigation for the next decade." "No, Commander. I said, waving a hand dismissively. Let them talk. A defamation suit would only legitimize their narrative that we are bullies. Besides, a televised interview is a poor weapon against the truth. Where is the Prescott family scheduled to be this weekend? Hayes tapped an earpiece, communicating with my intelligence team. Desperate for liquidity, Richard and Eleanor Prescott are attempting to secure emergency private equity funding. They have managed to acquire tickets to the Monaco Red Cross Gala this Saturday. They are hoping to corner some of the European venture capitalists. A slow smile spread across my face. The Monaco Red Cross Gala was one of the most exclusive high society events in the world. And as a ranking member of the European Royal Echelon, I wasn't just a guest. I was the guest of honor. Perfect, I said, standing up from my desk. Call my stylist. I need something spectacular for Saturday. It's time to put this rabid dog down publicly. The Salle des Étoiles in Monte Carlo was a vision of extreme, unrestrained wealth. Chandeliers dripping in diamonds illuminated a room filled with billionaires, tech moguls, and aristocracy. I wore a custom crimson Valentino gown that swept the floor, a diamond tiara resting securely in my hair, surrounded by my security detail. I was in my element, holding court, completely untouchable. I spotted them immediately. Eleanor, Richard, and Will looked profoundly out of place. Without the backing of their Mediterranean expansion and with their stock tanking, they lacked the effortless confidence of the ultra-rich. They looked like what they were, sinking ship captains begging for life rafts. They were hovering near a group of Swiss bankers, desperately trying to insert themselves into the conversation. I didn't wait for them to approach me. I walked directly toward them, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. Will saw me first. His eyes widened, and he instinctively took a step back, bumping into a waiter holding a tray of caviar. Eleanor turned, and her face went completely rigid. Beatrice, Eleanor hissed under her breath, trying to maintain a polite smile for the surrounding billionaires who had instantly stopped talking to watch the drama unfold. Eleanor, Richard, William, I said, my voice bright and carrying clearly over the ambient music. I'm surprised to see you here. I was under the impression Prescott Industries had initiated a travel freeze due to the impending restructuring. Several of the Swiss bankers chuckled quietly. Richard's face turned purple. We are perfectly fine, Your Highness, Will sneered, trying to regain some semblance of masculinity. Though I'm sure you're disappointed your little tantrum didn't bankrupt us completely. We're here closing a private equity deal tonight that will make us stronger than ever. Is that so? I arched an eyebrow. How fascinating. Tell me, are you attempting to close that deal with the Geneva Sovereign Trust? Richard blinked, startled. How do you know who we are meeting with? Because, Richard, I own a 30% stake in the Geneva Sovereign Trust, I replied smoothly. The color completely drained from Will's face. I signaled to a tall, impeccably dressed man standing a few feet away. He walked over, bowing his head slightly to me. This is Director Laurent, I said, gesturing to the man. He oversees all high-risk debt acquisitions for the trust, and unfortunately for you, my family's financial intelligence firm conducted a little due diligence on Prescott Industries ahead of your meeting tonight. I turned back to Eleanor, leaning in slightly, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. We found the shell companies, Eleanor. We found the heavily inflated asset valuations you used to secure your loans in New York. We found the bribery trail leading to the Boston zoning boards for your last 3 hotel developments. It seems your hard-working American legacy is built entirely on wire fraud and corporate espionage. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked as though she might faint. Director Laurent, I said, addressing the man without breaking eye contact with Eleanor. What was the trust's official decision regarding the Prescott's plea for a bailout? Denied, Your Highness, Laurent stated clearly, loud enough for the surrounding titans of industry to hear. Furthermore, as is our legal obligation, we have forwarded the evidence of their inflated asset valuations to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. I stepped back, taking in the absolute total ruin of the people who had tried to make me feel small. They weren't just losing their money anymore, they were going to lose their freedom. You wanted to warn your son about gold diggers, Eleanor, I said softly, delivering the final blow. You should have been warning him about the FBI. Enjoy the gala. It will likely be your last. News of the SEC investigation broke the following Monday, hitting the financial world with the concussive force of a localized earthquake. I was sitting in the conservatory of our London townhouse, sipping a macchiato and scrolling through the Financial Times on my tablet. The headline took up half the digital front page. Prescott Industries, raided by federal agents amid allegations of massive asset inflation and wire fraud. According to the article, the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission had simultaneously executed search warrants at the Prescott headquarters in Boston, their residential penthouse in Manhattan, and the Limestone Estate in Newport. Agents carried out dozens of boxes of hard drives, physical ledgers, and encrypted servers. It was a complete, unmitigated disaster for the hard-working American legacy. Well, by Tuesday afternoon, the board of directors officially ousted Richard Prescott as CEO. By Wednesday, trading of Prescott Industries stock was permanently halted. But the true twist, the revelation that finally proved just how deeply rotted the Prescott family tree really was, didn't come from my father's financial intelligence firm. It came directly from William. 2 weeks after the Monaco Gala, I received an urgent alert from Commander Hayes. I was visiting the National Gallery, privately viewing a newly acquired Renaissance exhibit, when Hayes approached me, his earpiece buzzing softly. Your Highness, Hayes murmured, stepping into the quiet, temperature-controlled gallery. Local authorities have apprehended an individual attempting to bypass the outer security perimeter of your townhouse. He is currently detained at the Westminster Police Station. It is William Prescott. I slowly lowered the exhibition catalog I was holding. William flew to London. He's supposed to be under a federal travel restriction. He apparently chartered a private jet out of a small regional airport in upstate New York before his passport could be formally seized. Hayes explained, his jaw tight. He is demanding to speak with you. He claims he has information that will ruin the royal family if you do not grant him an audience. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped my lips. The absolute audacity of the man was almost impressive. Bring him to the townhouse, Commander, but clear the drawing room. I want to hear exactly how he plans to ruin us. An hour later, William sat opposite me in my drawing room. He looked terrible. The golden boy of New York real estate was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, unshaven shell of a man wearing a wrinkled cashmere coat. He was trembling, though whether from jet lag, fear, or caffeine, I couldn't tell. I sat back in a high-backed leather chair, flanked silently by Hayes and 2 guards. You're facing federal indictment, Will, I said, keeping my voice conversational as if we were discussing the weather. Fleeing the country violates your bail conditions. That was a remarkably stupid decision. I didn't have a choice, B, he stammered, leaning forward, his eyes darting frantically around the opulent room. You have to call them off. You have to tell the SEC that the documents your Swiss friends gave them were forged. You have the power to make this go away. I have the power, yes, but I lack the motivation, I replied coldly. Your parents committed fraud. You built a lifestyle on stolen leverage. Why would I ever protect you? Will's expression shifted, twisting into something ugly and cornered. Because if you don't, I'll tell the press everything. I have emails, B. I have texts from when we were together. I'll spin a story that you were fully aware of our company's accounting practices. I'll say you were a silent partner. I'll tell the world that the Princess of Aldovia is a co-conspirator in federal wire fraud. Even if it isn't true, the scandal will stain your family's pristine reputation forever. I stared at him. This was the man I had almost married. This was the man who had held me in the dark and promised me a safe, quiet life. He was attempting to blackmail a sovereign head of state to cover his own cowardice. You really don't know how any of this works, do you? I asked softly, shaking my head. I reached over to the mahogany coffee table, picked up a manila folder that Hayes had prepared for me, and tossed it onto Will's lap. What is this? He muttered, looking down at the heavy folder. Open it, I commanded. Will opened the folder. Inside were dozens of bank statements, encrypted wire transfer logs, and offshore account numbers routed through the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. Jouret, when my auditors were looking into your parents' inflated assets, they found a rather interesting anomaly, I explained, watching his face drain of whatever color it had left. Your parents were desperate for cash because the company was failing, but the company was failing much faster than it should have been. Someone was bleeding it dry from the inside. Will's hands began to shake violently. The papers rustled against his lap. $50 million, Will, I continued, my voice sharp and unforgiving. Over the last 3 years, you systematically embezzled $50 million from your own family's company. You funneled it through shell corporations disguised as independent contractors for the luxury hotel division. And what did you do with it? You didn't invest it, you lost it. 30 million vanished in highly leveraged cryptocurrency crashes, and the rest you gambled away in private underground casinos in Macau and Las Vegas. No, that's not... Will gasped, unable to form a coherent sentence. Your mother was so paranoid that I was a gold digger, trying to steal the family fortune, I said, leaning forward, capturing his terrified gaze. She hired private investigators. She drafted a draconian prenuptial agreement. She humiliated me in front of 500 people to protect her wealth. And all the while, the real thief was sitting right next to her, eating seared scallops and letting her attack an innocent woman to distract from his own crimes. "Bea, please," Will sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "If my father finds out, if the feds see this, I'll go to prison for 20 years. The feds already have it, William," I stated flatly. "I had my attorneys courier these exact documents to the FBI field office in Boston 2 hours ago. I imagine federal agents are waiting for you at Heathrow Airport right now to extradite you." He looked up at me, his face wet with tears, completely broken. "You destroyed me." "No," I corrected him, standing up from my chair and smoothing my skirt. "I simply handed you the shovel. You dug the grave entirely on your own. Commander Hayes, please escort Mr. Prescott to the authorities at the airport. I am finished with him." As Hayes hauled a weeping William out of the townhouse, I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the gray London sky. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. For the first time in 2 years, the lingering shadow of the Prescott family was completely and permanently gone. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when lubricated by irrefutable evidence and extreme public scrutiny, they can grind with brutal efficiency. 6 months later, the Prescott empire officially collapsed. Richard and Eleanor Prescott entered plea deals to avoid a drawn-out public trial. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for orchestrating corporate fraud. Eleanor, having actively participated in securing fraudulent loans, received 5 years. William's fate was the most severe. Because his embezzlement crossed international borders and involved complex money laundering to hide his gambling debts, the judge decided to make an example of him. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The golden boy of Newport was traded for a jumpsuit and a concrete cell. To satisfy their massive debts and the federal fines, the courts ordered the liquidation of all Prescott assets. The yachts were sold. The Manhattan penthouse was auctioned off to a tech billionaire. And then there was the Newport estate. It was put on the auction block in early October, precisely 1 year after the disastrous rehearsal dinner. It was expected to fetch a massive sum from another old money family looking to establish their dominance on Ocean Drive. I didn't attend the auction in person, of course. That would have been entirely too gauche. Instead, I sat in my father's office in Aldovia drinking tea while Thomas Sullivan, my lead American attorney, bid via phone on my behalf through a blind trust named the Archival Foundation. When Thomas called to confirm that the gavel had fallen and we had secured the estate, I felt a profound sense of closure. "What are your orders regarding the property, Your Highness?" Thomas asked over the line. "Shall we hire a management company to maintain the grounds?" "No, Thomas," I smiled, looking at a framed map of the world on my father's wall. "I want you to contact a demolition firm, tear down the mansion, strip the limestone, sell the marble fixtures, and donate the proceeds to affordable housing initiatives in Boston. Once the land is completely cleared, I want it seeded with native wildflowers. You want to turn a $40 million oceanfront estate into a meadow, ma'am? Thomas asked, sounding delightfully shocked. Exactly, I replied. I plan to deed the land to the state of Rhode Island as a public park. I want it open to everyone, no gates, no country club memberships, no pedigree required. Just a beautiful view of the ocean that anyone can enjoy. It shall be done, Your Highness. Teacher, that evening I stood on the balcony of the royal palace in Aldovia, looking down at the bustling capital city below. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant salty breeze of the sea. My father stepped out onto the balcony, handing me a glass of champagne. Real champagne this time, not the bitter vintage I had choked down a year ago. A public park, Beatrice? He asked, his eyes crinkling with amusement. That is quite the architectural statement. I think it's fitting, I said, clinking my glass against his. They spent their entire lives building walls to keep people out. I think it's time to tear them down. My father wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I'm immensely proud of you. You went out into the world seeking a normal life, and you survived the worst it had to offer. But you never lost yourself. He was right. For a long time, I had believed that being Beatrice Victoria Hamilton meant I had to be cold, untouchable, and isolated. I thought that my royal title was a cage that prevented me from experiencing genuine human connection. I ran away to Boston because I wanted to be Bea, simple, unassuming, and normal. But William and his family taught me a crucial lesson. Toxicity, greed, and superficiality exist in every tax bracket. Hiding my identity didn't protect me from being hurt. It only made me a target for people who preyed on those they perceived as weak. I didn't have to choose between being the Princess of Aldovia and being Bea the archivist. I could be both. I returned to my passion for art history, but this time I didn't hide in the dusty basement of a library. I launched the Royal Aldovian Archival Foundation, using my family's immense resources to fund global efforts to recover stolen and lost historical artifacts. I traveled the world, operating under my true name, commanding rooms not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. I never forgot the cold wind coming off the Atlantic that night in Newport. I never forgot the sound of the helicopter blades or the blinding floodlights of my father's fleet. It was the night I stopped shrinking to fit into rooms that were too small for me. It was the night I realized that if someone demands you drop your crown to sit at their table, they were never worthy of your presence to begin with. Sometimes the fairy tale doesn't end with a prince rescuing you from a quiet life. Sometimes the fairy tale ends when you realize you already command the fleet, and you sail yourself into your own brilliant, uncompromised future. If this story proved anything, it's that true worth is never defined by the price tag on your clothes or the sneer of a toxic family, and that revenge is a dish best served with a royal naval fleet. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who completely underestimated you? Drop your story in the comments below. I would absolutely love to read them. If you enjoyed this journey of taking down arrogant billionaires, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible real-life drama stories.